Hey everyone, it's Rye bringing you Learning Lekmod episode number 14. This one is going to be an interesting video. It's going to be an introduction into specialists. I think this topic is probably one of the more difficult ones for new players to grasp, especially. But even some advanced players get it wrong. And this is not going to be an all-encompassing guide. This is going to be scratching the surface on how they work and what you should be thinking about when using them. That being said, they're an extremely important topic in Lekmod and how you can scale into the later stages of the game. And I think I think it's important to cover it at least a little bit in the beginner series. We're going to delve much, much deeper into, certain tech paths, what you want to be looking for, certain games for certain specialists, etc. But in general, I think let's just scratch the surface here, and I'll show you what's possible. And in terms of showing you what's possible, I'm going to show you how you can get your cap to look like this, where you're one turning a nuke. A nuke is 1,000 hammers. You're one turning a nuke on turn 144 with 262 base hammers. And you're getting 210 hammers from terrain. Now you might be saying, how is that even possible? You're at 32 pop. Right? Like, that's not even that high of pop. And you're right. And I'd argue this cap isn't even that good. So how is it possible? Well, in this game we're playing Germany. And Germany has an ability that it generates additional engineers. They generate faster engineers. Okay. What do engineers do? Well, when you plant an engineer, it turns into a manufactory tile, one of these. And these tiles have a fixed amount of extra base hammers attached to them. Usually you want to save your engineers for something like one turning a wonder, or you could opt to plant them. But most of the time you're one turning a wonder. But in this game, I decided I want to meme. I want to have some fun. Let's plant as many engineers as we possibly can and try to one turn some nukes. And that's what we did. So with Germany, with all the modifiers, with all the everything, right? We have 650 hammers in our capital, which is just ridiculous. So we were able to one turn nukes for like 4 turns on this cap. And then 2 turn 1 and then 1 turn some more. So kind of ridiculous, right? But how do you get to this point, right? Like this is obviously stupid. How do you get here? Okay, so I'm going to kind of show you that. So just as a baseline, how do specialists work? Specialists are essentially your population that instead of working a tile, right? If we go back to the picture, instead of working a tile, for instance, this 3 food 1 hammer tile, I can opt to work a specialist, which will have its own yields, usually pretty mediocre yields. For instance, this is giving me about 3 hammers for working this one specialist. But in addition to that, it's also giving me engineer points, or scientist points, or merchant points. So the way you get great engineers is by working great engineer slots. And those are usually associated with buildings. Additionally, and one very important thing that new players don't really think about, is that they're also found on wonders. So, for instance, Petra. Everyone likes Petra, but one thing that makes Petra really strong, debatably too strong, is the fact that it has an engineer point on it. So not only are you passively working towards an engineer every single turn, but you're also getting this incredibly good wonder. And this can be given to every type of specialist. For instance, like if you want to get universities, if you want more scientists, Brandenburg Gate has 2 specialist points, or 2 scientist points. You could get Red Fort, also scientist points. Porcelain Tower, Hubble. There's a number of Oracle, Great Library. All of these have great scientist points. Things like merchants, like how do you get faster merchants? Well, Machu Picchu, Mausoleum, Colossus, Great Lighthouse, etc. All of these kind of have merchant points. And then this even works on guilds. So your cultural buildings that generate you great people like great writers, great artists, etc. And the way you'd get this is, like, for instance, Notre Dame gives you an artist point. Globe gives you a writer point and a free writer. So these are all ways to kind of get more specialists. So how do we work these? Do you work them all the time? Let me just hop in this game real quick and I'll kind of walk you guys through it. And just to preface this, this is taken from a game I actually played very, very poorly, but it's from a real game. So I think it is fairly applicable, right? I think we hit universities, post workshops on turn, let this roll, but it's kind of looks like it's bugged, but whatever. It doesn't matter. The point is, this is a common spot you find yourself in all the time when you're playing something like Tradition, right? You just finished your universities and your artist guild, and you're asking yourself, okay, what do I work instead of these specialists? Do I want to put all of my guilds in one city? And we'll talk about this further later, but I think it's important to cover the basics now. The first thing is you do not need to put your guilds all in the same city. Some people think, because you have buildings like Hermitage and you have wonders like Alhambra that boost your base culture, and ways to get base culture in a city is working these specialist slots. But you don't necessarily need to be working them all in the same city. It's totally fine, even on Tradition, to split them up. So let's just say we're in Marrakech, right? I'm working an engineer. You'll see I'm making 1.8 engineer points per turn. If I unwork this specialist with specialist giving me 3, I'm making 1.2, right? I have a 20% city bonus, and that's from the garden. And then I'm also making one passively from Petra. Okay, so I think it's important to make the point, and I explain this a lot. Just because you don't understand where something's coming from doesn't mean it's not calculatable, right? This whole game is essentially one big math problem, right? And you can calculate every single number in this game. There's a couple things that you can't, for instance, like patronage, but I'm not talking about that. Essentially, every single one of these numbers you can further calculate. So what do I mean by that? I mean, if I work these scientists, I'll know exactly how long my scientist will take to come out. What if I don't spawn it in this city? What if I spawn it in this city first? Okay, well, I'll know how long the scientist following takes to come out. So all of this stuff can be calculated, and it's based on these points. I also like to think of specialists as not permanent, right? You don't have to work you don't have to work them all the time if you don't want to. For instance, this city, right? It's important to work university slots in general. I think university slots are some of the most important ways that you can fall behind if you're not working. So what do you usually sacrifice? Well, unfortunately, the main thing you want to sacrifice is usually hammers, right? We don't want to stunt our growth for the purpose of generating specialists. Usually that doesn't work out well for us in the end game. So working universities is great, but let's use this as an example. Machu Picchu is a pretty contested wonder most of the time. It's turn 80. It's fairly late for Machu Picchu to still be up, but maybe it's one of those games where people don't have mountains, or like this guy could build it, but I don't see it, right? It doesn't look like he's building it. This guy could build it in his cap, but doesn't look like he is, right? So I'm getting a pretty free wonder here, but maybe I'm worried someone's going to get it. I like to think of specialists as toggles. And by that I mean, if I take off this this scientist spot, what's really going to happen, right? I lose some base science for sure. I lose 4 base science, but I'm also losing 3 points. I'm still working 1, which is important, but I'm losing 3 points here. But what I'm gaining is the hammer, so I can finish Machu Picchu a turn faster. And maybe in my strategy, what I'm trying to do, that's more important, right? One other thing you want to keep in mind is don't put your guilds in cities without food. So for instance, Casablanca, and we're going to talk about this much more in depth in an intermediate level guide, but just generally, Casablanca has a ton of food, right? There's a lot of like these farm tiles. All the tiles it wants to be working have a lot of food on it. This is a perfect city for a guild. So I can unwork this hill and maybe this horse, or even better, this gold, and I can switch them to universities. So now it's working all these slots as well. So my cap is working. It just finished its artist guild. So what am I going to undo? Well, likely I'm going to undo this, this incense tile. It's not very important to me. And then this hill. And we're going to work that instead. Okay. And then let's go here. And, maybe I don't need the happiness. So I could build a garden or something maybe to get it faster. This is a good example of a city where the tiles are pretty bad. What do you give up to work it, right? Like, do you want to sacrifice even more gold for university slots? Maybe this is a city that's justifiably only going to be working one scientist for a little while until it gets to a higher pop. Because right now, it's not in a good position to just sit and do nothing, right? This is kind of why you don't want to stack guilds in one city, and you don't want to be working every single specialist. You'll see that this city is definitely gonna work a market once it finishes Machu, because I want to utilize this base merchant point. If I got Mausoleum or something, I would have been working the merchant in my cap as well, but unfortunately we didn't get that. But that's totally fine. The important thing is you don't have to be working all these slots. You have to kind of be thinking, what's gonna help my game the most later on? Usually it's spawning scientists, because that's how you stay tech relevant. But beyond that, it's honestly growing. It's prioritizing finishing your buildings in time. It's doing all these different things to kind of micromanage your sim until it's at a better spot, right? I want to finish this stoneworks like a turn sooner, or I want to make sure I finish Machu Picchu a turn sooner, or you can take this example for everything. And that's honestly the secret to being a good Civ player, is micromanaging every little thing like this until all of your cities are much better. It takes a lot of attention. You have to be very, very focused to do it. But this is what truly separates good from great people. And I think a perfect example of a testament to this is how well you manage your specialists. You're not mindlessly working all of your writers guilds right when you build it. If the city you built it in can't work it right away because it needs to get higher pop, don't stunt the growth just for the purpose of working a specialist. And then just to prove my point, it's turn 81. We're spawning an engineer. You'll see here, our engineer requires now 134 points. And that's going to be in every single one of these cities. So if I spawn if I spawn a scientist, regardless where it spawns, the next one that comes after it, all of those subsequent spawns are going to have a fixed amount of increase that it takes to spawn the next one. So it's always going to be 67 more points the next time around. And that's important because, we're going to talk about this very, very in depth in like a future guide. But for now, just know that spawning your scientists is very important, but it's not worth ruining your game, and it's not worth ruining a city. Keeping the city growing, keeping the cities building buildings is far more important than spawning a merchant or spawning an engineer or something like that, right? These are supposed to be supplements to help your game, not ruin them. And I want to make that point extremely clear because a lot of people don't fully understand it. But this doesn't have to be a thing that ruins your game. It can be something that makes it substantially better. So hopefully this makes sense. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Specialist is a very confusing topic, and a lot of people don't get it right. But I think proper specialist management is definitely a skill. It's a learned skill, and you can really have much better games and not ruin them. And I mean, this is even exacerbated more on Liberty, right? Tradition, you're often able to work all of your universities the turn they come up, right? And you'll have the pop. On Liberty, you might not have the pop. You might only be working one university slot in a couple cities for a while, but that's okay, right? As long as you keep the scientists spawning in other cities, it's totally good, right? And you'll feel the ramifications much later in the game, but it's not worth destroying your mid game just to work these slots. That's why in all of my videos, you'll watch me really emphasize growing your cities, finishing buildings, having early tempo to propel you forward, right? Specialist is a way to slow your game down in a way, but kind of give you a really big advantage later on. And a lot of times, maybe your cities aren't ready for that, or maybe they're not up to snuff. Maybe your land doesn't support a lot of early specialists, but it'll, work out later. That's totally fine. Everyone's game is different. Everyone kind of progresses differently. Your sim is only as good as the land it's on, right? So some land won't support it, and that's totally fine. You just have to understand how it's going to affect your game by working them. I see a lot of people being like, all of my factories are 8 or 9 turn builds. Yeah. Okay, let's see what hammer tiles are you working, right? And they'll be working like all specialists, or they won't be working a single hammer tile because they'll be working all specialist tile and all food, right? You have to like identify, okay, like if I'm doing this, like my hammers just went down. If I unwork my unis and my artists, I just went up. Look at how much hammers I went up. So I'm at 40. I'm at 40 hammers right now. If I unwork all these, I'm at 56. So I just gained 16 hammers by unworking specialists, right? This is how you can quickly build things. This is how you can speed things up. You have to think of specialists as a toggle, not something that's always there. It's something that you can choose to work and choose to unwork, right? It's not something you have to prioritize heavily if your game doesn't allow it. That being said, I think there is a lot of benefit to working them, right? Having an engineer for important natural, like world wonders, like Leaning Tower or Sistine, is sometimes instrumental to a game. So not working your engineer slot could be really bad. Some rules of thumb I'd like to say before I end the video. Rule of thumb is you always kind of want to be working your university slots as a priority. If you can't work artists, that's fine. Just keep working your unis. You want to, like university slots is really how you propel into the later stages of the game. So priority is definitely on them. After that, I always work an engineer slot in my capital every single time. Ideally, you work it in 2 cities if you have wonders supporting that. But the priority is definitely in your cap. Work an engineer slot so that you can spawn an engineer for these Renaissance wonders. If you've seen my wonder guide, you'll know a lot of the really good wonders appear in late medieval, early Renaissance. That's when you want to be spawning an engineer. So pretty much instantly work your workshop slot as soon as you finish the workshop and in your capital. After that, I would definitely recommend working artist guilds over writers guilds if you have to choose. But artist and writers guilds are very important. And there's a reason I'm not mentioning merchants and I'm not mentioning musicians. Merchant slots are they're very niche strategies for commerce. If you're not playing commerce, I wouldn't even bother most of the time. I think they scale pretty well, but for the most part, it's really not worth it ruining your game for a little bit extra money. And then finally, musician slots. Even on tradition, I find myself not having the capacity to work these things. These can be such bait. It's insane. So a lot of people get baited by working musicians. I don't really find it necessary. I don't think it fits into my game. I don't think it fits into my play style. I'm a very big culture fan, but I find myself struggling to find time to work merchant slots. So just keep that in mind. You don't have to work everything in every city. You don't have to work everything at all. But maybe after watching this video, you'll see, okay, I have Great Lighthouse and I got that fairly early. Maybe I can plant some merchants this game and have a lot of high base gold in my city. And that's definitely a strategy. And I would recommend doing that if that's what you're doing. But understanding I got the free merchant point from Great Lighthouse, I need to build my market and work the slot. That's going to speed up my merchant spawns drastically. Okay, so that's all for this video. Let me know if you have any questions. Again, this can be a very difficult to understand topic, but understanding this goes a long way. So that's all for now. Stay tuned for the next one.